Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Anxious Love Coach podcast. I'm very excited to be here with you today. Today is potentially one of the most important episodes that I've recorded in a long time. Obviously, every time I record a podcast, I feel like it's so important. I think part of that's because when I share a podcast, it's usually because something is coming up for me very, very strongly. So it always feels that way. But this one is very important too. It is I'm going to retell my relationship anxiety, my story with relationship anxiety and how I overcame it, but I'm also going to be sharing it in a larger context. So I looked at my stats today of how the Anxious Love Coach podcast is doing. And you guys, it's just incredible. We have around 633,000 downloads of the Anxious Love Coach podcast. Those are just podcast downloads. It doesn't include the number of people I've worked with and the numbers of people that have been in our programs. It doesn't include Instagram. It doesn't include TikTok or YouTube. Or it's like literally just the podcast alone has 633,000 downloads, which is insane. So for whatever reason, I don't know for sure how many subscribers we have. It doesn't really matter to me. The fact that there's so many people listening to this content just blows my mind. And thank you. But interestingly enough, 80,000 of those 633 downloads are for the number one episode, which is episode number 1 of Anxious Love Coach podcast, which was recorded over 2 years ago. It's been a while. So that episode was called How I Broke Free from Relationship Anxiety. That was the first podcast episode I ever recorded, and it is the most popular one, which makes sense because it's something that I was speaking to, and it was the most important thing for me to share at the time. And as I continue to add more podcasts, aka more context, there's more and more information. But the downside of this is that my story with relationship anxiety makes it seem, at least that episode makes it seem like that was the end of my story. And it wasn't. That was the beginning of a story. Now, for many of you who are in the thick of relationship anxiety, looking at me, you think that I've arrived in some place. And so you tell yourself that when you get to the place where you think that I am, that you will be very happy. And you might for a short while, but it's not the end of the story. There's more. And so today's episode, I want to share that same story for those of you who are new, so that, you could go back and listen to that episode. You'll see how far I've come. But you could also just listen to this episode and see a bigger, wider story. That includes more than I could have possibly shared back then because I couldn't have seen what I see now. So I want to actually start off this episode with a Chinese proverb that goes something like this. And I don't know exactly where it came from, but it's out there. I'm going to read it from the interwebs. The story goes like this. A farmer and his son had a beloved stallion who helped the family earn a living. One day, the horse ran away, and their neighbors exclaimed, "Your horse ran away. What terrible luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few days later, the horse returned home, leading a few wild mares back to the farm as well. The neighbors shouted out, "Your horse has returned and brought several horses home with him. What great luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." Later that week, the farmer's son was trying to break one of the mares, and she threw him to the ground, breaking his leg. The villagers cried, "Your son broke his leg. What terrible luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few weeks later, soldiers from the National Army marched through town recruiting all the able-bodied boys for the army. They did not take the farmer's son, who was still recovering from his injury. Friends shouted, "Your boy is spared. What tremendous luck!" To which the farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." The moral of this story, of course, is that no event in and of itself can truly be judged as good or bad, lucky or unlucky, fortunate or unfortunate, but that only time will tell the whole story. Additionally, no one really lives long enough to find out the whole story, so it could be considered a great waste of time to judge minor inconveniences as misfortunes or to invest tons of energy into things that look outstanding on the surface but may not pay off in the end. So the reason I shared this story is because from the vantage point of the relationship anxiety story that I shared in episode 1, from that angle, you think that I have it all. You think that I've arrived in some place. I don't have relationship anxiety anymore. I don't have anxiety anymore, period. My relationship is super stable. I'm content. Life is so much easier. And in some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. And I guess today's episode is for me to share that story within an even larger context than I shared back then. So for those of you that are new, and this is maybe the first episode you're hearing, or maybe you haven't even really looked at season 1 of Anxious Love Coach, maybe you're finding me now and you're listening to my more recent episodes and you haven't really seen where I came from. And so that's going to have its own limitations as well. But so some of you guys are going to be new and just hearing this episode for the first time without hearing the first one. And others of you are going to be people who have been with me for a long time and heard that first episode and found it to be super empowering. And maybe you think that's the end all be all, is to get to that place that I was describing. And to be honest, it makes sense. It's kind of like when a lot of rich, like super wealthy people are like, hey, money can't make you happy. And all of us are like, yeah, but I want to find out for myself. I want to make money and then find out it's not all fun and games here at the top. So while I do acknowledge that I have a certain level of privilege and luck and blessedness to be able to speak on relationship anxiety from this lens 2.5 years later after releasing that very first podcast episode, it's worth mentioning that is not the end of my story. And so I would not put me in a box, not because, I get offended by that. I deal with that every day. I'm kind of used to it. But because by putting me in a box, you actually put yourself in a box and you set yourself up to get attached to a certain result in your healing journey. Relationship anxiety for many people is the first time they experience a split within themselves, a split that forces them into a choice point that is very painful. I have to choose this or I have to choose that. Both choices hurt. Why do they hurt so bad? And how do I make peace with pain and in the freedom and the choice that I'm making? So I don't have the answer to that. It's very difficult. It's very human. I can only speak to what it was like for me. So by the time this episode comes out, I will be on honeymoon. So I'm recording this a little bit before Press and I finally go on our honeymoon. We finally got married back in June. And we are officially going on our honeymoon in 1 week. And so I am currently doing a little podcasting marathon so that while I'm out, you can at least get a few episodes while I'm gone. So this is one of those recorded. There's also Lucy Lamp's, my podcast with Lucy Lamp, which is going to go out a little bit before this one. So I'm hoping that you guys maybe will have listened to the podcast I did with Lucy Lamp on the 5 stages of relationship evolution. That will kind of tie into the concepts that I'm sharing with you today, the whole thing about context. When we're in stage 1, assuming in this context that there's 5 stages of a relationship or relationship evolution, when you're at stage 1, stage 3 seems like the end, woohoo. But when you're at stage 3, you're like, oh, fuck, there's more. So I just want to let you know that when I was speaking to you, in podcast episode 1, how I broke free from relationship anxiety, I was coming from a place of being in stage 3, which is we're in this place of peace and equality in the partnership, and there's a lot of safety. And I thought that we had made it until we started moving into what Lucy was talking about in stage 4 and stage 5. And a lot of stuff that had all the tools that I had suddenly became not useful. And so there was a point about a year ago when a bunch of stuff in my relationship 10-year partnership surfaced, like literally right before our wedding. And I didn't know if we were going to make it, to be honest. And that is probably really terrifying for a lot of you that maybe look up to me and think that I have all the answers. Well, Press and I we were not sure if we were going to make it. We weren't even sure if we were going to get married because so much surfaced right before then. It was very frightening. And it was something we did day in and day out. And we seem to have made it out for now. Marriage and long-term partnership is a daily decision that you make. It's not something that you decide in advance for the rest of your life. Would I love to be with my partner forever? Fuck yeah. Am I committed? Yes. Is it a guarantee? Hell no. So Just because you become more confident and secure in yourself doesn't mean that your relationship is set. Doesn't mean that anything's set. Quite the contrary. It's just a matter of when these things get taken away from you. And that is simultaneously heartbreaking and so beautiful because it keeps you present and appreciative. So from beginning to end to the new end that I'm going to share with you today, at least up until this moment, my story with relationship anxiety. So Preston and I met back, and I'm excited for this because it means I get to tell my story all over again. So Preston and I met back in college. We were in a fraternity, like a little co-ed fraternity, and I was a pledge, and he was one of the, he was the president, leadership role. So we were not supposed to date. Pledges and leadership positions are not supposed to date, which made it so much sexier when we started dating. It was very rebellious, it was very hot, very sexy. And by the way, if your story doesn't line up with this, that is okay. This is just my story, but it doesn't mean that yours will look like that. If anything, maybe even at all, but this is just mine. So we met back in college and we had a very, very hot and spicy few beginning years, maybe 2 years of just super awesome, super hot, very connected, very crazy about each other. A lot of love built in those first couple of years, at least the love that the love that would kind of start to be a foundation, but it was founded on being really intensely desirous of each other. But there was also a lot of commitment that was built over the first couple of years. But we still had no idea what we were doing. And once I graduated college, he'd been working in his family business for a couple of years at that point. And both of us dove out of the beautifully set up communal lifestyle that university life is. I studied pharmaceutical sciences, believe it or not. But once we left that kind of university setting, we dove into what we might call the quote unquote real world. And so I dove into a sort of pharmacy sales job. I worked in a corporate office in a little cubicle doing phone calls all day. And I just started to feel the life getting sucked out of me. I gained a bunch of weight. I got a lot of cystic acne. I started experiencing IB, irritable bowel syndrome, for the first time. And I just started to feel really sick. And meanwhile, Preston also was in a family business, trying to get a business that was not online, because otherwise it really would not scale. And so his family business, his parents were older, and so they didn't have the same skills and virtual know-how that Preston had. And so the first couple of years, he was just kind of being like, what the fuck do I do here? What's my place in this business? I'm barely 22, 23. How do I build something here? So spent the first couple of years probably dicking around. And then eventually he started to put his energy in the right places and build this business. And it succeeded. It started to do very, very well, to the point where he became this like intense machine. He had like an Amazon business, and it took his whole life. It really just grabbed his whole life, and he became obsessed with building his business, online business. Meanwhile, I was figuring out my career as well. And I really hated working in this cubicle life job. I realize a lot of people still do that, and it doesn't mean they hate it or they don't. I personally hated it. It wasn't a good fit for me, but I needed to be there at that time to create a foundation for what I know now. And I needed to know how to work hard so that if there ever came a time where I needed to do that again, I knew that I could. So I'm not against taking a job. Anyway, another topic for another day. During these times, one of the things you can hopefully notice is that both my partner and I were still boyfriend and girlfriend at that time. We're just figuring out our shit. And we're both getting really lost. We're getting almost sucked into the matrix of what we should be doing, what society said we should be doing. I should be climbing the corporate ladder. He should be scaling his family's online business. But in the process, we had kind of neglected our own soul's boundaries, which is, I think, normal. There comes a time where we separate from our true selves in order to get done what we need to get done in order to ensure our survival, or so we think. And during that time, ironically, is when I started to feel disconnected from A, myself, and B, my partner. And I wish I could say it was all me or it was all him. Like, clearly he wasn't really it's not that he wasn't interested in me. He was still showing up. We were still going out to dinner. We were still intimate. But a lot of the spice that had been there when we first started dating, and a lot of the ease was gone. All of a sudden, all that was replaced by a bunch of life responsibilities and societal pressure to be somebody. And in that process, we were so like stuck that we couldn't see each other. And I would look at him and be like, you're too busy for me. You're not really present. You're not romantic anymore. You're not doing all these things. And meanwhile, I'm simultaneously not taking care of myself. And so I'm completely running on empty. He's running on empty. I can only imagine, new parents and how that must feel. So it's kind of along the same lines. We're both running on empty. I'm looking at him, wanting him to make me feel better. He's looking at me overwhelmed by the pressure to take care of both me and himself, and he can't even take care of himself. So we're both running on empty, looking at each other, feeling totally disconnected from ourselves and each other as well, and resenting each other for not rescuing the other. So I wanted Preston to rescue me. He wanted freedom from having to rescue me. And it was just a lot of ick. And around this time, I started to really question whether I was in the right relationship. And maybe a lot of you listening are in this stage right now. And if you listen to my relationship anxiety story from episode 1, you'll hear me say that I was in a really healthy relationship, and I just had a lot of trauma that I had to work through. And what's crazy is that is still true. However, it wasn't the only variable. It's like I was equating this to a single variable algebra. And I was saying, well, once I just fixed my stuff, the relationship magically got better. And it's true, it did. But the equation wasn't actually a single variable algebra equation. There was a multivariable, and I solved for one. There were many, many variables. My trauma was one variable of the overall dissatisfaction of the relationship. And as I solved for that one variable where I started taking care of myself, the relationship as a whole improved. I didn't have relationship anxiety anymore because I was trusting myself. However, all the other stuff was still unresolved. And I was okay with that. So that was powerful, but it was still unresolved. And not to say that, all issues are resolvable. And John Gottman actually says there's tons of, I would argue there's a lot of chronic relational issues that are stuff that you just manage. It's not something you fix. But again, another topic for another day. So when I was in the thick of being really genuinely dissatisfied with my partnership, there were multiple variables. Yes, there was relational trauma, and there was also trauma on his end. And so when you're feeling this emptiness inside and you're looking to your partner who is also running on empty, and you're looking for them to save you, and they can't, and you resent them for it because you're still operating out of this belief that your partner is here to save you, and then they can't, and then you start thinking there's something wrong with your relationship. And there may be something wrong with your relationship, and it might be something that will never get fixed, or it might be something that won't get fixed right now. We have no way of knowing that, and that is really uncomfortable for our egos. So during that time, I would come to Preston and say, I feel disconnected from you. I don't feel like I have love feelings for you, which would make him really sad, understandably. And he was still feeling it, but obviously he had his own stuff as well. So I remember a few instances where I would come to him and say, I'm thinking about leaving. There was even one instance right before Christmas where I said, let's take a break. And I was shocked on that. I remember that day very well. I was shocked to see just how well he responded. For all I know, he could have just been in a dissociating and running on autopilot. I don't know. But the way he responded was with so much self-trust. He was like, all right, well, I'm not going to force you to stay. And of course, I thought that was so sexy, and I came running back. So I wish I could say that, it was a totally healthy relationship. I just had a lot of trauma. I wish I could say that, but it wasn't totally true. There were a lot of genuine problems, and a lot of people in my position would have left and been so glad they left and went on to say, don't settle. And I would not blame them. And it just so happens to be that my relationship made it to the other side. And I believe that there are a lot of relationships out there that can and will make it to the other side with or without my advice, or not even advice, but just like with my thoughts. Maybe you listen to my podcast and you've made some changes and your partner changes. You may or may not have triggered that. Right? There's no way to know for sure. How do we know for sure? I have a lot of clients that I work with, and they come to me when they're going through some shit in their lives. And I don't even want to say I help them. Who knows? It's kind of like one of the things I learned when I was in studying pharmaceuticals. We were talking about antidepressants. It's like, how do we know for sure that the antidepressants are working? Because maybe they would have gotten better anyway. So it's tough to track for sure. How do we know for sure that, you got better because of me? Well, it's really hard to know that for sure because you don't have another life to compare to. So there's no way of knowing for sure whether my content actually changed your life. It might have changed anyway. The reason I'm saying this is just in a nutshell, there's a lot of people out there who will be happy they break up. There's also a lot of people who go through hardship, stay together, and then they get to the other side. But then for every couple like that, there's another couple that stays together and it never gets better. But then if we think about that Chinese proverb that I shared at the very beginning, it's like, well, in what context? Maybe it'll get better in 20 years. Maybe it'll get better in 30 years. Maybe it'll get better in 5 years. Maybe it'll get better tomorrow. And this is absolutely infuriating for many people. It's like, well, how long is too long? And there's no answer to that. There's no answer to that. And that's why I say relationships are a daily decision. I made a series of daily decisions to be with my partner for 5 years of shit. And not to say all of it was shit. There was definitely something there that was keeping me there, something deeper, maybe a more long haul vision. Maybe when I looked in my partner, I saw an integrity in him, even amidst a lot of behaviors that I thought were out of integrity. Maybe I saw an integrity in him deep down, and I had a faith in him deep down that there was a man that was going to unfold that I was going to be very proud to be with. And I ended up being right, but that's not a guarantee for anybody. I waited a long time to get that, and I'm sure an alternate reality exists where I'm still waiting. So it's all a very big mystery, and I say this to remind you that you should trust yourself more than you trust me. Okay. So how did I actually break out of relationship anxiety? Well, around this time when we were having a lot of issues, I was feeling really disconnected. Preston was like, not sure how to make me feel better. He also thought it was his responsibility to make me feel better, which made him resentful and withdrawn. It also made him turn to, I'm guessing this contributed to what made him turn to pornography at some point, to almost like be able to feel something without all the pressure, which I had a whole episode on pornography a little while back. So if that's something you want to listen to, definitely check that out. But there was plenty going on that I didn't know about. There's just, we kind of had two separate lives. So during this time, Preston's getting his kind of needs met through porn. I'm getting my needs met by going out into the world and being a total flirt with all sorts of men. I would get crushes left and right. And, Preston was getting his need met for no pressure by looking at porn. I was getting my needs met for intimacy through conversation, and eventually like things like dance and tango. Not to say that any of these things are objectively wrong. Flirting objectively is not wrong. It's just a matter of in what way and in what context and within what boundaries and agreements. So I think for the most part, we were within the agreements, but there was still a lot of unconsciousness there. And I'm not going to share every detail because there's things I want to keep to myself. I don't share every single thing on my podcast, but that means that you're always going to be missing context. So we were going through a lot of yucky stuff. And at some point we found ourselves in a relationship coach's office. She had lots of great reviews on Yelp. And indeed, she was absolutely wonderful. We saw her for several months at a time. And one of the things I remember she said to me was, I remember she turned to Preston and me and said, Natalie is not just afraid of marriage, because we'd been 7 years in and I was still in the thick of relationship anxiety, saying, should I stay? Should I go? I don't know. I don't know if I love you. I love you now. No, I don't. Blah, 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 blah. And when we were sharing this with the relationship coach, she looked at Preston and said, Natalie's afraid of marriage is an understatement for Natalie. To Natalie, marriage is fraught. The idea of marriage is fraught with trauma. Frightened of marriage is an understatement for this woman. And it was true, because every time we started talking about commitment, I would go hazy. My brain would get really foggy and I would lose all sensation in my body. I would just get so scared, and I would totally dissociate. And so the coach, fortunately was very confident in her scope of practice, and said, I can't help you with trauma. You need to go see someone who specializes in trauma. But I will tell you that the response that you're having right now is a trauma response related to commitment. And I was like, okay, I don't know what the fuck to do with that. So I didn't do anything for a little while. I just kind of moseyed around. It was around this time also. It was like a night before my mother got remarried to my now stepdad. This is a few years ago. I'm still in the thick of relationship anxiety, and I stumbled upon the term relationship anxiety and relationship OCD. I think I first heard about it from some blog, and then as I searched, I found stuff on Cheryl Paul, who's amazing. And that was kind of my first time hearing about relationship anxiety. And it was such a relief. It was such a relief. I imagine it's the relief that many of you guys feel when you find my content. I had the same experience as you when I found Cheryl Paul. And granted, her background, the understanding that I have of Cheryl's background, she's got a very Jungian background, a Jungian psychology background. So of course, that's going to be compatible with conversations about relationship anxiety, because we're talking about splits in our consciousness, right? So I dove into this stuff like it was the Holy Grail. And indeed, there's a lot there. And if you haven't found Cheryl Paul's content, I highly recommend checking it out, because it's a lifeline when you're struggling with relationship anxiety with an imperfect but committed partner. So for me, that was very, very, very useful. And I remember being like, whew, okay, well, now I know that the issue is just me. My partner is totally healthy. He has no work to do. I just need to fix my trauma and I'll be good. That was my perception. So I remember I was diving into her stuff. I took some of her courses. She's got one called Break Free from Relationship Anxiety also, and it's just a wonderful program. And then I remember there was a day where I was reading a book called Bad Girl's Guide to Getting, I think, Impersonal. And I forget exactly who the author was. I thought it was Mama Gina, but I recently sent the book to one of my clients and she's like, it's not by Mama Gina. But anyway, it's like a pink book and it's like a little drawing of a girl, and it's a really silly, girly like looking book. My aunt sent it to me just for shits and giggles and to have a little more fun in my life. So I was reading through the book, the Bad Girl's Guide, and there was a list of like radical things you can do for yourself. And one of them was like, book a trip, like right now. And I remember putting down the book, opening up my laptop, and I just like booked a 3-week trip to Austria. It was so random. It was not something I'd been thinking about. I wasn't just like, oh, I really want to go to Austria for 3 weeks. It was a spur of the moment, like a little bolt of lightning that said, we're going to Austria. Open your laptop and go buy the ticket. So bloop, just dropped like a round trip $700 ticket to Austria in the summer. So it was around Valentine's Day. I booked it for August. And Preston came home and I was like, hey, I booked a trip to Austria. And he's like, what, when? Or am I coming? Like, what? And I was like, nope, just for me. So fortunately, he was very supportive of it. He didn't protest. He was just I think he thought I was probably a little weird for doing something like that. I taught yoga at the time in corporations. I already had my own business doing health coaching and embodiment work within the yogic context and teaching asana. So for me, it was very easy to just pick up and go and send my clients a little notice. Hey, I'm leaving for 3 weeks. So long story short, 6 weeks later, or 6 months later, I went to Austria. And I remember landing in Vienna, and I'd only had maybe 1 or 2 nights booked. Everything else, I did not have planned. I had no idea where I was going to end up. So I had those first two days booked in an Airbnb so that I had a place to be alone. And for me, it was very freeing to not have to think about Preston, because when I had relationship anxiety and I was constantly questioning whether he was the one, part of the thing that made it so unbearable was the guilt around it, because I could see that he was clearly very into me, even though he was doing a lot of things that at the time we could perceive as disempowering. So even though he had a lot of icky dynamics, it was very clear to me that he was committed, at least on the surface. And so I perceived myself as the problem and something that needed to be fixed. And so I felt a lot of guilt and pressure to heal so as not to hurt my partner. I really wanted to make sure I wasn't hurting my partner, and yet I needed so much space. So when I got to Vienna, there definitely was this sense of relief that I didn't have to be facing my partner all the time. I didn't have to worry about rolling over to see him in the morning and not feeling any love towards him and feeling so guilty about the fact that I can't return his affection because it doesn't feel authentic. So in that way, there was some relief. But I also remember that the problems didn't just go away. The anxiety came with me. The lostness came with me. The emptiness came with me. The meaninglessness of my life came with me. The IBS came with me. It's like there's that saying, wherever you go, there you are. And so while Preston was not a variable that I had to consider while I was in Vienna, all the other variables that were my issues came with me. It's just now I'm in Austria. It's like I came to Austria to like get rid of my anxiety and depression, and now I'm anxious and depressed. I'm just in Austria. So that was kind of my first inclination, my first message that like maybe it's not that Preston was not part of the problem, but he was not the full extent of the issue. And it also affirmed to me that that I actually was very committed to my partner, even though I wasn't feeling a lot of love, what we might call love feelings towards him. I even had this like message in my head, this like weird agreement in my head, like, okay, if I get to Austria and I want to sleep with random strangers, that'll tell me that he's not the one. And so I had this like weird belief around this, but I was really scared. I was scared that I was going to arrive and I was going to fall for some Austrian person, and I was going to want to make out with them, and then I'd have to break up with my partner. And like I created this whole story in my head. Well, first of all, that even if that were true, even if I did get to Austria and I wanted to sleep with other people, that wouldn't necessarily mean that I didn't love my partner. I'm realizing life is a lot more nuanced than that, but it gave me a temporary little fix that life could be so simple, even if it was so painful. But life is not that simple, as we know. It just so happened that when I arrived in Austria, I had no interest in sleeping with anybody. I had no interest in sleeping I had no desire whatsoever. So there was no one to flirt with. I was not, and in a way I was actually relieved to have a relationship back home because I had an excuse in case anyone hit on me. It's like, I'm in a relationship. Sorry, not interested. So it was very interesting to me that not only did I not, want to sleep with people, but that I was actually using my relationship as a way to buffer against that. So interesting stuff. Anyway, for the first couple days in Vienna, I just sort of moseyed around. I walked to the Belvedere Palace. I walked around. It's a freaking beautiful city. Vienna is one of my favorite cities in the whole world. It's full of music, very clean, very predictable. For my anxious mind, Vienna was so nice. All the trains always came on time. Everything was always clean. The society followed all the rules. It's like one of the most predictable cities I've ever been to. It's not like, it's not like the country of Italy where a lot of things are chaotic, or even, I used to go to Russia a lot when I was younger because my family's Russian, and Moscow was like, you never know what to expect. With Vienna, you always knew what to expect. So it was really wonderful for my nervous system to be able to lean and trust this very safe city. So I enjoyed it very much. And everything felt very fair. Everything in Vienna felt very, very fair. So I really liked that part of it. It allowed my nervous system to relax. I could just wander around and just stare at the summer wildflowers and enjoy the old Austrian and European architecture. So that was really nice. Anyway, by day like 3 or 4, I was like, what the hell am I doing here? I'm in a hostel. I remember I was in a hostel with like 8 people, a hostel room with like 8 people. And there was like this German lady talking in her sleep really noisily. And I was like, man, what the hell am I doing? I can't sleep. This room is 1,000,000 degrees because there's 8 people in it and it's in the middle of summer. This German lady is cussing in her sleep. I'm sleeping right next to her in a room full of strangers by myself. I have a boyfriend back home. I have a job. What am I doing here? I was so lost, but in hindsight, it's like a little bit comical. And I remember going to the common area and I just searched retreat centers that were in Austria. And I don't even know if that website exists anymore. I found this one place called Alpenhafen. And there was a woman there named Steffi Price who was kind of running this little country house in Austria with her family. So I reached out to her and I was like, hey, can I come to your house? I just found your website. I'm really lost in my life right now. Can I come stay with you in the mountains? And she happened to say yes. So I the next day I packed up and I took off by train into the beautiful Austrian countryside, into the Alps. And then I stayed at her house. And literally, as soon as I arrived, I got to my bedroom and I just broke down and wept because I felt the presence of nature. And I even kind of felt my grandparents. It was a very weird feeling. Something about the smell of the house and the I don't even know what kind of wood it is, but it smelled so wonderful. And the smell of wildflowers brought me back to my childhood in Europe. And I was just returning to my roots that I really felt. I felt so held. I felt like I had full permission to be totally broken and messy. And Steffi has a very, very powerful energy. So, by the way, I'm co-hosting a retreat with her, 2 retreats with her this summer. So June is all filled out. June is sold out, but we still have some spots in September. So if that's something you're interested in, Steffi and I are hosting a retreat on the inner relationship. Feel free to email me, Natalie@anxiouslovecoach.com, and I can send you some details. Anyway, so I arrive at Steffi's place, and over the next 2 weeks, we do a lot of trauma healing techniques. And I uncover a lot of pain around relationships in the past, ex-boyfriend pain with real-time pain that I'm experiencing with Preston, pain around my parents' divorces, pain around my childhood, certain relationships or levels of relationships that I didn't get, a certain loneliness. There's an existential pain of the fact that everything ends. I understood that conceptually, but I finally understood it in the level of my body. So much pain. It was like buckets and buckets and buckets of tarry pain, just oozing out of my body. And it was not even, I couldn't talk about it. It was just every time I would come to session, just grief would pour out of my body. There was a real safety in that time. And it was just right place at the right time and with the right person. And as soon as like a good week and a half in, I was like, whoa, I feel like myself. I haven't known this feeling of like self-love in so many years, and a real kind of self-love, like not a self-love that's dependent on a lot of external circumstances, but just a self-love towards all of me, all the messy parts of me. And there was a stillness, there was a silence in my mind. I was able to walk around without thinking about my partner. I was able to walk around in the world without ruminating. And I remember being like, Steffi, teach me everything. So I kind of unofficially, I have a lot of official training, like in meditation and in a lot of the yogic philosophies. And I obviously have my health coaching background, which teaches me how to have healing conversations. But a lot of these techniques that were so life-changing, I learned through Steffi. So I want to give her a lot of credit for that. And like I said, we're hosting those retreats this summer, which just is amazing. It's coming full circle. So and the irony is, I remember on the second to last day of my time with Steffi, I called Preston and I said, I'm all in. I'm in this relationship. Like, I'm ready to commit now. And he was understandably skeptical. He was like, okay, you just hung out with this lady in the mountains for 2 weeks and now you say you want to get married. I don't know if I get married. Like, I wanted him to feel ready too, but I just said, like, I have both feet in in the relationship now. I'm not wavering on this decision. I want to be with you. And he was still deep in his shit. Like, it's not like he was a perfect partner and I was finally letting myself accept the beautiful love. It's like I was deliberately choosing something that was in some ways still quite unsatisfying. I was deliberately choosing something very messy. But I knew that I wasn't going to be able to build something if I didn't make a decision, which is what I'd been doing for years. It's just avoiding decisions. But I made a decision, said I'm committed to you. And it was something I was able to do with my full heart. And so it took a few years for Preston to propose after that, partially because COVID happened and all these COVID happened like a year after that. So there was a lot of things that got put on hold that were supposed to happen. But I think also maybe, this is my interpretation, maybe he needed to witness me being all in for a little while. And I demonstrated that. So I came home and it was incredible. All of a sudden I was hanging around Preston. I wasn't having thoughts about, is he the one? I was just like, I'm here. And no matter how I feel, I'm here. And there were days where I was so grateful that I stayed with my partner and opened my heart to him. And there were some days where I'm like, damn, this shit's really, really freaking hard. But I wasn't freaking out every time something got hard. I just was like, damn, this is hard. And I would just, learn how to tolerate those moments while also holding the desire and the trust that with more time and more skills, things would improve, because I still could see my partner's goodness. I really did. And I wanted to stay. So did we still have issues? Fuck yeah. But they were different issues. They were not issues of should we be here or not. They were issues of I miss you, I need you, this and that. But there wasn't this whole layer of rightness or wrongness on top of it. It's like we were in the trenches now. There was a real commitment. And it was around this time where we started to like actively talk about finances and building our life together and what that might look like. So even though there were still issues, the questioning, the ruminating was gone. And it was around this time that I started Anxious Love Coach and recorded episode 1. And make no mistake, that was a huge breakthrough. Like a huge, huge, huge breakthrough. To go from having relationship anxiety to not having relationship anxiety is a world of a difference. It frees up so much mental space. You trust your decisions. It's not that the issues are gone, but the issue of the ruminating, the issue of the questioning is gone. And so it's kind of weird. It's like you're actively choosing disappointment sometimes, because disappointment no longer means that something is wrong with the relationship. So that was such a huge awakening, so big, life-changing. And for many people who are struggling with relationship anxiety, this is what they dream about. They dream about being able to be okay with disappointment. Like, is that even possible? Is it even possible to, be unsatisfied and still want to keep going? Yes, it is. Maybe you still believe on some level that there's more to learn here. And if that's your reason, who can judge you? That was my reason. And I can tell you my relationship got a lot better when I stopped wavering, but it didn't become blissful by any means. It was still very, very difficult. Preston was still watching porn. I was still flirting with other people, and like a lot. I was a big flirty birdie. Because there was the deep part of me that was still wanting to get met. It's just I didn't want to leave my partner. And I think a lot of people, as uncomfortable and squeamish as this might make you, I think a lot of people can relate to this. It's like, I really love my partner and I want to be with them. And there's a part of me that's still ravenously longing to be met. It was my sexual side. So, yeah. And by the way, that was part of what contributed to the relationship anxiety. It's like there was a part of me that was genuinely dissatisfied. It's just that I wasn't about to leave my partner. And I thought that I was this deep spiritual person and he was this earthling. I even used that language in the early podcast. It's like my partner's an earthling and I'm the spiritual one. I'm the hippie. And so I'm looking for like other hippie type people, other spiritual people. It turned out that it wasn't so black and white as that. It turned out that I was hiding parts of myself in the relationship and my partner was hiding parts of himself in the relationship. Turns out my partner is not an earthling. I thought he was. He wasn't. But so long as he was only showing parts of himself to me, I couldn't see it. And it didn't give me room to desire these shadow aspects of him. So when you guys heard episode 1, you heard me from the place before all the shit that happened 2 years later. I don't want to say shit because shit implies that there's a lot of judgment around it. And indeed, there were times where there were. But there was a lot that came up just in the last couple years while I've been running Anxious Love Coach. And it's important that you guys see that too. So there were times in the last year or so where I was so deep in it and I was like, I don't know how I could possibly talk about relationship anxiety in the same way, because there were moments of when a lot of these truths started coming out and I say, listen, I've been flirting with so and so, and he says I've been watching porn, and we're just like, wait, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? Like, I have a whole freaking platform where people think we have this life and it turns out we have this other life. And we had to bring up all these new wounds to the surface. So if you guys listen to that podcast episode, Lucid Lamp, it's like we moved from stage 3 into stage 4, and there was this dissolving of a lot of stuff, that a lot of things that we thought were foundational to our relationship, versions of ourselves that we thought we were. I thought I was this super peaceful, not jealous type. Turns out I'm a psycho jealous bitch. I have it in me. Turns out I only found that out a year ago. 2 years ago in me, I was like, I have no jealousy. Well, of course I didn't have jealousy. My partner was going through shit and he wasn't super attractive to me, let alone other people at that time. So as soon as he started, of course I don't see other people as a threat. But as soon as he started to like really work on himself and heal all his traumas, well, he became a lot sexier to me and to others. And all of a sudden, all this jealousy came up. And I didn't factor in for that when I recorded episode 1. So I share this with you now just to like let you know that episode 1 was not the end all be all. It was just the beginning. So how did this happen? I got Preston's permission to share this, but after his business collapsed during COVID, my yoga business collapsed during COVID, I was going to become a financial advisor at Edward Jones. That's what I was like, getting ready to just take a total life pivot and be responsible and get a real job. And then Anxious Love Coach exploded, which I'd been doing just as a passion project at the time. And people started saying, can I work with you? And I was like, well, I have some credentials that are relevant, but a lot of this is coming from my personal experience and my personal opinion. Do you still want to work with me? And people say yes. And it ends up being beautiful because I'm staying within the boundaries of what I can and cannot work with. So, some forms of complex trauma I am not certified to work with, or formally or informally trained in. But whenever I feel confident in something, I let my clients know and I stick to that. So, where was I on this? Back in the day, I was essentially speaking from that place. And now I am speaking from this place. Oh, what I wanted to say, sorry, I'm back on track. When Preston's business collapsed, mine collapsed, I was going to go work at Edward Jones. Anxious Love Coach exploded. That became my full-time thing. I didn't need to become a financial advisor at Edward Jones. And when that happened, we all of a sudden found ourselves in a totally virtual situation. I was like, oh my God, we're not tied to a location anymore. We're location independent. Preston doesn't have work. I have work. It's online. There's a global lockdown. So where did we go? We went to Medellin, Colombia, which is, by the way, where I met Sheridan. She was one of my first clients, and she ended up working for me for a good year and a half. And it was awesome. She got me to this place, and now I'm back at the solo venture. So we were there in Colombia for a good 3-4 months. Then we traveled some more. This past year in 2022, we returned to Colombia for an even longer period of time. In this September, we're planning on moving there permanently. But during during the pandemic, we were traveling a bit, but we were stationed a lot in Medellin, Colombia. And in Colombia, we found ourselves, I'm just going to say this, for those of you that don't know, we did ayahuasca. So I'm going to be the first person to admit, which if you're wondering what ayahuasca is a type of plant medicine. It's a tea that is brewed, and it is considered a psychedelic. It's very powerful medicine. It can help you connect to your true self. It can help you process trauma. People have often said that you can do 10 years of therapy in an ayahuasca ceremony or an ayahuasca retreat. I do not recommend ayahuasca to everyone. I don't believe it's something you need to seek out. I don't believe everyone needs to do ayahuasca. I believe life can be an ayahuasca experience. Life in and of itself can be very intense. You don't need to have ayahuasca to have an awakening. However, Preston did. So if ayahuasca finds you and you feel called to do it, and it's a safe, you have a good container, because the context that ayahuasca takes place in is often more important than the ayahuasca. If you do ayahuasca in an unsafe environment, it can re-traumatize you, in my opinion. So it just so happened to be that ayahuasca found us in Colombia. And for me, I'd been doing a lot of healing work up until then. So it was very helpful, very powerful, very healing. But a lot of my big healings had happened with Steffi. So it was just kind of affirming more of the same for me. And the first we went on a few retreats, but Preston's big awakening, did not happen until his second retreat. So he took ayahuasca kind of futilely for a little while, just a lot of suffering, a lot of compassion built, but definitely a lot of suffering. Didn't really connect with it until later when he did it again. And in April of 2022, Preston went alone to an ayahuasca retreat and had a massive spiritual awakening. I did not expect this. This was 2 months before our wedding. 2 months before our wedding, Preston goes to Colombia. He has a little intuitive voice that says, I think I need to do it again. And I said, go. So I shooed him away and told him to go to this ayahuasca retreat again. He goes alone. And I remember him texting to me and say, hey, I just had a full-blown spiritual, he texted me after 5 days of being away from his phone. He just texted me saying, I just had a full-blown spiritual awakening. And I was like, okay. And then he started texting me about finding his masculine energy. And all of a sudden he started talking about things that I'd been talking about for years. And he would just kind of be like, hippie, weird hippie. And all of a sudden he started talking all these weird hippie things to me. And I was like, what the fuck? This was my territory. Now you're in my territory. I often talked about the spiritual journey as going on the Z axis after you've been on the XY axis for a long time. And so sometimes we connect with other people who are on the Z axis. Well, all of a sudden Preston was on the Z axis. And I was like, what are you doing on my Z axis? I have built a whole life on the Z axis outside of you. And now you're in my lane. And I felt simultaneously so terrified because I'd been living this spiritual, it's not like I was cheating, but I was definitely flirting with other people. I was mingling with other energies. And I just had developed a whole spiritual life outside of my partnership because I perceived he wasn't spiritual. And all of a sudden he was, and it was overnight. I think most people don't change like that in 5 days. And so I was simultaneously so terrified and yet so turned on. And I felt this immense emotions coming up because all of a sudden I was able to open more of myself to my partner. I had grown to believe that you don't get all your needs met by your partner. And that was a real game changer for me at the time. When I recorded episode 1, I thought to myself, my partner doesn't meet all of me, and that is okay. And I still believe that. That has not changed. However, it's a different context. My partner is now meeting sides of me that he wasn't meeting before. So when he texted me and said, hey, I just had a spiritual awakening. I see what you were saying now. I understand what you've been talking about this whole time. Sorry it took me so long. I see you. No, and I'm sorry for the ways I've been not present with you. And here's 5 ways I understand what you've been saying for all these years. I understand what you've been saying in Anxious Love Coach. Your spiritual mama jumbo stuff is starting to make sense. And I was just, it was so exciting and so terrifying at the same time because it meant that a can of worms was getting opened. It was like our old problem of me not being seen for my spiritual side was suddenly being seen. And I didn't know if he was going to like what he saw. And I wasn't sure I was going to like what I saw in him, because he had all this spiritual side of him that I thought didn't exist, actually did exist, and had been deeply repressed for a long time. And now it's here. And this is 2 months before our wedding. So I basically sent my partner away 2 months before our wedding, and I got a totally different person back. And it was one that I was very excited about, but it was also really unstable. It was a really unstable time. And even when we got married, things were really, really unstable. And the process of a wedding is inherently destabilizing. So it's kind of crazy. We were planning a wedding while we were also healing and trying to meet each other. There were moments where I wasn't sure we were going to make it, because, a lot of our wounds were coming up, and we thought we were incompatible. At some point, Preston's like, I want freedom. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to control you. I want to trap you. And the whole dynamic actually flipped. There was a time when Preston was kind of chasing me, and I was the more avoidant one. And all of a sudden, he's the avoidant one, and I turned anxious. And so a lot of us who have these anxious avoidant tendencies, we think we're locked into these roles. Well, there's yin yang, baby. So wherever there is anxiousness inside you, wherever there's an anxious attached inside you, there's an avoidant attached inside you as well. And if your partner is an avoidant attached person, there's an anxious attached person inside there too, dormant, waiting to be exposed. And so all it takes is for one person to change, and the whole dynamic changes. And that's exactly what happened to us. So the relationship anxiety dynamic kind of, it just turned around. And that was a total shock to my nervous system. It was a shock to our relationship's nervous system, if you consider our relationship to have a breathing life form of its own. And we had 2 months to figure out if we still wanted to get married, and we did. And somehow we made it to the other side. So, did things get better? Yeah, but it was really, really difficult. It was really, really painful. Preston came clean to me and saying, I've been watching a lot of porn. And I was like, I've been flirting a lot. And we're like, okay, so we have not been completely honest with each other. We have been doing things that are human. We're both human, but we were not revealing our broken hearts, our loneliness, our longings to each other. And indeed, I don't know if there's necessarily anything wrong about that. Not everybody wants a conscious partnership. Not everyone wants a conscious partnership. And it's okay if you don't want that. And I got forced into one. So, essentially, as soon as I recovered from relationship anxiety, and I went from having relationship anxiety to not having relationship anxiety, there was a lot of peace in my life, and I started focusing on myself. I stopped controlling my partner. I became more loving. I started making love more of a practice. I stopped making my partner wrong. I stopped criticizing. I stopped controlling. And that was big, because it gave my partner space to be himself. And I can't say with certainty that that is what caused a context that would allow for my partner to finally have a big blossoming open of his own. But I do believe that when we're controlling and nitpicking and criticizing, we trap our partners in a way that doesn't allow them to grow. And so if you want your partner to, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I wish my partner had a spiritual awakening, be careful what you wish for, my dear. But if that is what you want, it will come. If it will come, it will come when you let go of control, when you start focusing on your own pleasure, when you start focusing on your aliveness, when you keep your eyes on your own paper and you focus on yourself. Not to say become totally independent, not to say become totally avoidant, but it just means you don't put your happiness in the hands of someone else and you make them responsible for you. So overcoming relationship anxiety allowed me to keep my eyes on my own paper. And that was a necessary part of my healing. And it created space, and it dropped the shame in my partnership and in myself. And I stopped shaming and controlling my partner. And that created space that I believe contributed towards him even going to another ayahuasca retreat by himself, unprompted, giving him space to have an awakening. So it's in hindsight, it's a very, very beautiful story. But the stuff that unearthed as a result of his spiritual awakening created a lot of issues. And it's not like these issues are gone. I'm still pretty jealous. I just joke about it now. It's not as debilitating as it was in the beginning, but I can't say with certainty that it won't come up in a debilitating way later. Put me in the right context, I can become a psycho. So I feel very alive. I feel very human. Surprisingly, I also feel more secure than ever because, like I said, awakening doesn't mean I don't know if I said it, but I'm saying it now. Awakening doesn't mean happiness. Becoming more aware does not mean becoming more happy. Becoming more aware actually means you have more capacity for pain. So overcoming relationship anxiety doesn't mean I don't feel pain anymore. Quite the contrary, you guys, I feel pain all the time, but I don't have so much resistance to it. And so it doesn't stay as long. It doesn't trap me. I don't spiral for as long. And if I do spiral, I do it consciously. It's like, all right, we're going to spiral. Let's spiral. Let's go. I'm ready. Let's see what I'm going to learn here. So there's much less resistance to what is. But when there's less resistance to what is, it means you allow pain in a lot more readily. That is what having more awareness is. So I hope that, when you're hearing my story of Natalie overcame relationship anxiety, that's what I want because I want to be free from pain. It's not free from pain over here. It just means you're not in resistance to pain. A lot of people come to me and they think I'm going to help them get rid of their pain. And that makes sense. Why else would you hire someone if they weren't here to, supposedly fix a problem for you? And it's tricky because I literally receive money. And I have to be careful with this, but it's just something that I see. People come to me because they're in pain and they want to get out of pain. And so they pay me money so that they can get out of pain. And I tell them that pain is a part of life. What do we do? You paid all this money for me to tell you, you got to feel your pain. And you got to feel it to the extent that it's meant to be felt. And that's hard. And who's to say that you need me to tell you that? It just so happens that they want to hear me say that to them personally. But you don't need a person to tell you that pain is meant to be felt. There's gifts in pain. There's beauty in pain. It's just a matter of, it's not if you should have pain or not, if you can get rid of it or not. It's how are you using your pain? Are you using it to create beautiful art? Are you using it to find deeper meaning? Are you using it to discover parts of yourself that are not you and let go of that stuff? Are you using it to remember more of who you are? Are you using your pain to question the beliefs in your life, the versions of yourself that you thought you had to be, but actually you don't need to be? Are you using your pain to question whether you need to be attached to the things that you're currently attached to? Can you use your pain to remind you to let go of what you thought you needed so bad in order to be okay? Turns out you don't a lot of the time. So that is what the work is about. Can I help with that? Yes. But the work is not about getting rid of pain. I am in more pain than ever before, you guys. But it's a very empowered pain. It doesn't last as long. I have tools to work with it. I welcome pain. It's something in a weird, twisted, maybe even masochistic way. I kind of enjoy it. I find a beauty in it. And I think that, in my opinion, is where we go. And we actually, through that, find a deeper joy. There's a deeper joy when you embrace the highs and the lows, within and without. So that, I guess, is my story. So when I think about episode 1, I think about a woman who was so relieved to not be questioning her relationship anymore, to have both feet in her relationship and to feel very empowered in that state. But I also think she was a bit naive, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm naive right now to the part of me that's going to be, someday I'm going to be a parent. And I'm going to be looking back on this episode and be like, there's more context, you guys. Remember that Chinese proverb I shared at the very beginning? There's going to be more context in 2 years. There's going to be stuff that I see in 2 years that I couldn't possibly see now. We're always naive. And this is a very humbling thing to accept about yourself. You're always naive. I'm always naive. There's always context you're not seeing. So I wanted to share this story again, but from a larger context, so that you can see the even bigger picture than in episode 1. So I will say that when I had relationship anxiety, it wasn't just my trauma. It was somewhat my intuition. There were things that were off about the relationship. It wasn't either or, because a lot of us come to this thinking, am I in the wrong relationship, or do I just have relationship anxiety? Honey, it could be both. It could be that you're in a relationship that is really shitty right now, and it's your intuition telling you that this is really shitty right now, and maybe you should leave, and maybe you shouldn't. And I think, you could think of it more as maybe I could leave, or maybe I couldn't. Maybe it really comes down to a matter of willingness. Do you want to keep going? And there's no certainty. Natalie can't tell you whether you should stay in your relationship or not. She can just share her story and say, this is what I did, and I'm very glad I did it. But who's to say that you couldn't do something completely opposite and be totally fine too? And this is why it's important to, at some point, establish a relationship with something bigger than you, to trust that there's a plot to your life that you can't even see. So in the last 2 years, I've had a plot twist in the story that is Anxious Love Coach. There's more. There was a plot twist. And my teacher, Steffi Price, always used to say, be open to being surprised. Be open to plot twists. And you might be surprised by yourself in the years that come. So allow yourself to make whatever decision you make, even if it feels rebellious to make it. Maybe your decision is, I'm really unhappy with my relationship and I'm going to leave, and that's empowerment. It could be, I'm really happy in my relationship and I want to leave, and that's empowering. There have been people who walk away from relationships that checked all the boxes and they're so glad they did. Well, good for them. Why would I want anything else for you? There's also people who are in shit wall to wall and want to stay, and they end up being glad they stayed. And then there's people who are in shit wall to wall and they leave and they regret it. Like, all these combinations exist. But so long as we think there's a beginning and an end to our story, just like in that Chinese proverb that I read at the very beginning, if you're only thinking of it in the short term and you're not looking at the broader context of your life, imagine like you're on your deathbed, looking back at your full story, being like, yeah, that time in my life made no sense to me at the time. It didn't make sense to me that I had a pharmaceutical science degree, and then I got 2 yoga certifications, and then I got a health coaching degree, or like a certification. And how does that end up in me being in a 10-year partnership on top of that? How on earth does that result in me being a relationship anxiety coach? I could not have predicted that if I tried. And yet this is what I'm meant to be doing, for better or for worse. There's something that comes through me as a result of this unique combination. Some people ask me, how can I become a relationship anxiety coach? And I say, well, there's probably certifications out there. But my guess is that your gifts will be a result of your unique experience combined with whatever training you get. And I believe as long as you stay within your scope, you can do whatever you want. And, there will be times when your message is not meant for everyone. So this message might be perfect for some of you, and maybe some people for whom this message is harmful. And I have to always be aware of that and not assume that my story is universal or should be taken as truth, because it's not. It's only mine. So please don't put me on a pedestal. Part of that is my little girl inside saying, please don't cancel me. Please don't kick me out of the group. But there's another deeper part that says, for your own safety, don't put all your eggs in the Anxious Love Coach basket, because there's still more we don't know. There's still more certifications I don't yet have. There's more training I haven't yet gotten, both official and unofficial training. There's always more we don't know. And be willing to make a decision in the presence of not knowing. So I will say that in my partnership, we're in the best place we've ever been. And that is really cool to be able to say that 11 years in, I am absolutely madly crazy, deeply in love, and in a very flirtatious, deep sense. And there's a lot more freedom, a lot more safety at the same time. So we've done our work, I guess I could say. Best place I've ever been. So by the time you are receiving this, I will be on honeymoon. And there's something I am doing throughout my entire honeymoon, and that is going to be offering a honeymoon sale because I'm not taking any clients, but I still want to be making an offering. And that is going to be a 30% off sale while I'm on honeymoon for all of my online courses. So my most popular one is my signature course called Both Feet In. By the way, this course includes some of the more recent insights. That one is it's on sale for 30% off. I also have a recent masterclass that I led called Watch Your Language. This one is a lot more about verbal and nonverbal communication with your partner. I just did a little 7-day challenge called Quit Comparing Your Relationship. That one is really fun too. So I'm going to put all these links in the show notes. If you want to take advantage of this while I am gone for the month of March, use the code HONEY30 for 30% off to take on any of my courses. All right. So Both Feet In, Stop Comparing Your Relationship, Watch Your Language Masterclass. So any of those, you can apply the HONEY30 discount code and you will get 30% off while I am on honeymoon. Enjoy the courses. And if you are interested in attending my retreat in Austria this summer/fall with my teacher, Steffi Price, who I mentioned today, it's going to be all about the inner partnership, the inner relationship, the relationship we have with ourselves. And there's going to be a lot of parts work. So if you feel that inner split, there's a part of me that wants to stay, a part of me that wants to leave, or really just any internal split. Maybe it's a pull to move in a career direction, but there's another party that doesn't want to do that. And you're struggling to find congruency and get parts of you on the same page so that you can actually move forward in your life. This is going to help you a lot with that. It's going to help you with emotions. You're going to connect with other people who are on the same journey. And also, Steffi's house is just gorgeous. It's such a gorgeous space, and the mountains are so healing. I have shed many tears in those mountains. So it's coming full circle, very sacred place for me. So if you're interested, feel free to shoot me an email, Natalie@anxiouslovecoach.com. While I'm on honeymoon, I may not be responding right away. I may check my email like once a week while I'm there. So like I said, the June one is sold out. The September one is still open. So if you email me during that time, I probably will email you, in early April, which still leaves you plenty of time. But please do email me so that I can send you the information if you do want to come. I have 4 spots left as of right now. And that's it. I hope that you have a wonderful day and that you enjoyed this episode. And I will chat with you in the next one. Take care.